Revealed in the series, African Americans have come further in the past 50 years than many people may think, while simultaneously having much farther to go than anybody expected. And it sounds like a real contradiction, but if you look at that and you look at where we are in America, America kind of feels like a large contradiction, right? Take responsibility, but there's systems and history and political and economic powers that be that could potentially be roadblocks. And so everybody, really quickly, I'd like you to kind of do an opening statement, kind of like the presidential candidates. I'm going to give everyone 2 minutes, and I'll cut you short, so I don't mind stopping you, to kind of tell us maybe what we've learned as a nation, what you took away from that piece, and, you know, what are the next steps to doing better. We'll start with our first panelist to my left, Dr. Arbulu.
Thank you very much. When I think about the first segment, I think about it in terms of, thank you. When I think about segment one, I think about it in terms of my role as Executive Director of the Michigan Department of Civil Rights. And I think about the progress that we did make in Michigan. In 1962, when Article 5, Section 29, one of the first provisions in this country that forbid discrimination based on color and race. That was something that was unheard of, if you really think about it. And then we came about and then passed legislation in the Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act of 1975, providing a system in which we could address discrimination. And that is something very powerful that very few other states have. It is a state law that we can make use of. And we believe here at the Michigan Department of Civil Rights that it is incumbent on the residents of this great state to really hold us responsible, make use of it. Where you find discrimination, raise your voice, file complaints, push the envelope, let us investigate, let us push forward on it, because we have those laws in place, and it is something that has not been taken away. And I'm very proud of those provisions. And for us here at the Commission and Department of Civil Rights, there is no greater complaints than discriminations based on race. And that is unfortunate, but a reality. And we have to fight it every day. And to me, I think about it every day. How can we be effective? How can we get that message out to each and every resident out there that you just don't have to sit by and accept discriminatory acts?
Thank you, thank you. All right, Peter, feel free to chime in on that.
Yeah, a really powerful documentary, and thank you for having me here to be part of this discussion. It's often important, we teach at the Key Center and training law students, to see what's not there. So there's a lot of very important things that were there, but sort of what are some of the things that are missing? And they're sort of hinted at and sort of embedded implicitly. But I want to kind of raise up the notion of power and perceptions. We often use at the Key Center a dialectic between beliefs and institutions. And I think it was most brought out in that interview on CNN with Wolf Blitzer, right? And I wrote down what he said. He says, "What I want you to say is," right? And how that shows the media has a very powerful role in shaping the narrative and policing the narrative and framing the narrative, and how understanding and deconstructing the way that those belief systems are created is an important part of what we're doing. And I'll share with you just two of sentences that I was teaching today, a seminar on reimagining development in Detroit. And this is coming from a Chilean biologist who talks about the cognitive biology, Humberto Montanaro. And he says, we do not perceive the world we see. So we do not perceive the world we see the world we are taught to perceive, right? And it shows how important the perception component is and how we have to interrogate those perceptions. And then he goes further, and this is what really made the connection to Wolf Blitzer and CNN. He says, when one human being tells another human being what is real, they are making a demand for obedience, right? And I think that's the kind of thinking that this should elevate in our thinking, but we have to go beyond the kind of nice imagery of the documentary and see the underlying beliefs that are perpetuating the institutions that are wound up in this network of structural racism. So I encourage us to go beyond the individual narrative and start thinking deeper about some of the structural concerns that confront us.
Wow. Peter. Make sure your kids take his class. All right. Dr. Peters, feel free to give your reflection on the piece and what we do next.
I really like what, is this on?
Yes, sir.
I really like what Peter had to say about the perception piece, with Wolf Blitzer. I would hope that the full documentary includes more than was suggested. I'm pleased to see that Dr. Gates, is my West Virginia homeboy, had speakers like Dr. Peterson and Dr. Brittany Cooper, and Jesse Jackson, who clashed with the kind of obedience I think that Gates typically lays out there. Rhapsodic. I thought he was going to sing, "We've made so much progress," But this notion of him and a couple of his nerd friends in Keystone, West Virginia, watching Bill Cosby with his no acting behind on I Spy, being ecstatic, about what? Progress in America? We're talking about people on television. We're not talking about culture. I love my sister Donna Brazile, but her talking about Soul Train dressed up like Big Bird on Sesame Street, teaching us how to live. I'm like, no. These are Negroes on television. When you talk about black culture, where's Nina Simone? Where's Curtis Mayfield? Where's Gwendolyn Brooks? Okay? Where's Amiri Baraka? If you're talking about culture, there's a big difference between what's being played on TV, which is typically written by somebody who is not black, and it's always typically preaching a kind of contentment, The business with Bill Clinton was interesting, but incomplete. You shouldn't bring up Bill Clinton, playing the saxophone and holding a black boy. He probably led to that black boy going to jail, as far as we know.
Okay.
So I would say that.
Well, what we're going to do is we want you to hold on because we want you to say more, brother.
Okay.
We're going to get to the culture part.
Okay.
So don't take offense, but I might have to jump in a couple of times.
I'm good with you.
I appreciate that. Next up, Brother Shakoor.
Thank you very much. My thoughts went back to some famous words that were expressed by Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court back in 1857, Chief Justice Taney. When his court was asked, can a Negro whose ancestors were imported and sold as slaves become a citizen, in the word in which that word was used in the Constitution? And that was Dred Scott's famous case. And of course, the Supreme Court in 1857 said no, and they were not intended to be included in this Constitution as a citizen. And I reflect on that as I looked at some of the so-called advancements, but oftentimes what appears to be is not what the essence of that which is. The power that has been a vacuum in the African American community in 1857, in 1957, in 1967, and 2016 is a ability to control one's destiny. It's an ability to aspire and be able to reach those heights that one aspires to reach without, as Professor and good friend Peter says, is the quality of the structural racism, which I like to just define as white supremacist thinking. White supremacy is still running amok in our society. And of course, we do have some advancements that have been made economically. We do have some advancements that have been made politically over the course of many years. We're no longer enslaved in a lifetime condition in which we were called personal property, known as chattel slavery. We no longer have children, grandchildren, and others who were tied into that system for 246 years of our existence here in America, 1619 to 1865. But there have been some advancements. The
Can I
advancements
stop you right
are-
there? Let me stop you right there, because I don't want to. We're gonna come back to that, because I want to circle back to that, brother, because I'm capturing some of this data, because I'm in class right now, and I appreciate that. But we want to
Okay.
circle back, give the other three a chance, and then we're gonna drill down into some of those. Shirley, we'd like you to jump in.
Yeah, I think when I think about progress, particularly as it relates to what we've seen tonight, really this is about progress that African Americans have made toward receiving full citizenship. And as Judge said, we started out behind to begin with. And the progress that we've made really has been related to policies and legislation that have been put in place. So the 1964 Civil Rights Act was about sort of changing things, closing the gap, if you will, around education and public accommodations and those kinds of things. So policies are important, and the strides that we've made have really been directly related to that. If you think about Jim Crow was a law of this land, and when I was a really little girl, my parents are from Louisiana, and we would go to Louisiana every year, get in a station wagon. And I experienced the men, women, colored bathrooms. There was a law of the land. And so legislation had to occur to change those structural kinds of things. It is important for us to work to convince individuals about change. In my work in Detroit, our work is really all around structural racism and policies, and it is long-term. This whole trek toward full citizenship has been long and bloody. And a lot has been left along the way. We'll continue to incur casualties as we work toward moving toward closing the gap around the structural racism issue. I remember Proposition 2. We talked about, that was about maybe 10, 12 years ago. And everybody said, oh, we're going to vote for it. It's about affirmative action in Michigan, as many of you know. And as individuals, if we had tried to take the time to change individuals, we would still be doing that, because it's a life's work. That was voted down, even though folks said, yes, I can do it. So we have to continue to focus on those policies, legislation, to change things, because as individuals, we work with them too, but that's really, really a much, 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 much longer trek.
Thank you. Kim?
So there were a couple moments that really stand out for me, and I want to kind of go back to Peter's observation about the exchange with Wolf Blitzer, because I thought that really was powerful. And I'm someone who started my career as a print journalist, and I know how important framing is. And I think that one of the things that I remember a few years ago when we had the shootings in Charleston, one of the first questions they were asked of the victim survivors were, well, do you forgive? I mean, it was just unimaginable to me that you would fix your mouth to even ask a question like that of someone who just lost their, and the people granted forgiveness, but it wasn't for you to ask for forgiveness. It's for people, forgiveness is a process. And I just think that what we have, I'm a child, I was born in 1969, so one of the things that also stood out to me as I watched this was there was this idea that the black middle class was expanding in the late 60s, and it was. I mean, there was definitely economic growth, and that was kind of the birth of the Coleman Youngs and the mayors all over the country. Actually, for the first time, we were seeing the deepening of black political power. But I think that I've always kind of believed in this quote from Dr. King where he says the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. But I have to be honest with you, as a 47-year-old woman sitting here today, I'm starting to wonder, does it bend towards justice? When I drive down the street and I see a Trump sign, that's a personal assault. I mean, I feel as though that is, I feel, my feelings are hurt by that. I mean, that, you know, that someone can say, I will put aside that he believed that the Central Park Five should have been executed. I can put aside that he thinks that entire religion can be banned from this country because I don't like Hillary Clinton, or for whatever. I'm not saying, I'm not here to be, although I'm clearly a Democrat, but I'm not here to, but that you could somehow set aside things that are so atrocious is personally, you know, I think I've never felt this way about a political candidate, and it's just, it makes me wonder if the arc of the moral universe really is bending towards justice in our society. And I don't want to be hyperbolic, but you know, there are so many signs. And as someone has said, many people have said, what we're seeing now on television has always happened. The difference is cameras. It's
Right.
not that the actions.
So
it's
we're
that
gonna-
it's always happened.
We're going to jump into that too. We want to wrap up this portion with Terence, and then we're going to start drilling down and getting a little more granular. Terence,
Yeah,
please.
I'll just be brief. You know, a couple things that stood out to me was one, the evidence piece, and how white America views evidence as opposed to black America. And so they said, well, the overwhelming amount of evidence, he's guilty. Well, what about the overwhelming amount of evidence that we have for Freddie Gray, for Tamir Rice, for Mike Brown, Eric Garner, Emmett Till. So the difference is that when we have evidence, they say, well, let the evidence play itself out. But no one ever goes to prison, ever. And so, and the second point is Barack Obama. For me to have played a small role in him getting elected the first term, and to see him now represents to me ferocious determination, a high resilience for my people. And I would say to anybody out there that enthusiasm is common, but endurance is rare.
All right. So we appreciate that, and I think it was important for us to kind of level set with the immediate thoughts, because now what I'd like to do is I like to kind of pivot a little bit and kind of follow some of the key themes that came up. You know, in preparation for this, I decided to just sit in the room with some 16-year-olds, and I actually showed them what you guys just watched, and they gave me some real feedback, and they really tapped into culture. You know, young people,
Yeah.
you know, they're absorbing culture at a rate so fast right now. And one of the young people asked this question, and I was like, you know, actually tongue-tied, didn't know how to answer it. He said, do we really have influence? He said, you know, if black people really have influence in mainstream America, then what are the ways that we can leverage that influence to have a better life? And I said, well, talk to me more about that. And the more and more he talked to me about it, the one thing that I came away with is that how do we translate that influence, if we have it, to a more equitable experience in America? And so how do we do that? And so that's one of the questions that they came with. And so if there's an appreciation for the way that we walk and talk in the swag, or the way that we influence things, for an example, where does that end up? I'm going to start on the other end with Tarence. Politically, socially, and economically, how do we shift that paradigm?
Well, I think influential-wise, we have economic buying power. You know, so we're influenced by our dollars that we spend or don't spend. As I walk around Detroit, oftentimes when I'm going into a gas station, which is fundamental to having a car, you go into a gas station. Why is there a bulletproof glass there? That, to me, represents environmental racism. You're telling me that I want your dollar, but yet, if something happens, I'm going to be covered and you're not. There's drug paraphernalia being sold and counterfeit clothing, and no one says anything. So when I talk about power, we have power with our buying. We can shut anybody down. Target, Macy's, you name it. We can shut them down. Just don't go there. If you don't value us, if my life doesn't have value, my dollar doesn't have value, and doesn't circulate in our community, we have to stop this economic violence and ethnic suicide in our community. We can shut them down.